My name is Elena Voss and I am 41 years old. For 15 years my family believed I worked somewhere quiet and unimportant, filing papers in a courthouse basement far from home. They never asked for details. They never needed to. I was the older sister who had already failed once, the one who left, the one who made everything simpler by staying gone. Then on a grey Saturday morning in late October, my mother put both hands on my shoulders in her kitchen and told me to confess to a felony my sister had committed. A man named Walter Boone lay in the ICU with a shattered hip and a broken leg. My sister had been driving my car. My father did the math out loud the way he always did. She has a campaign, he said. You have nothing to lose. Sister didn't even look up from her phone. She just smiled the way she smiled for cameras and asked, who'd believe you anyway? They already had a lawyer sitting at the kitchen island. They had already typed my confession. What none of them knew about my job, about what my car had been recording, or about the quiet woman who was still awake when my sister came home that night, would take their perfect story apart piece by piece over the next 7 weeks. This is that story. I drove 6 hours back to Harlow County because a 13-year-old asked me to. My niece Emma texted me in September. Grandpa was turning 68. Please come. She put a little heart at the end. That was enough. I hadn't been home in almost 3 years. The house looked exactly the same, which felt like its own quiet insult. White columns my father still couldn't quite afford. A blue banner over the porch that read VOSS for State Senate in the same shade as my sister's eyes. Inside the front hall sat the wooden bowl on the side table. Every set of car keys in the family went into that bowl the second you walked through the door. My mother started the habit when I was 7. She called it hospitality. It was inventory. I put my keys in like everyone else. In the living room, a wall of framed photographs stretched across one entire side. I was in 9 of them. The newest was from a graduation 14 years earlier. After that, the wall simply continued without me. Nobody ever planned it. Nobody sat down and voted me off. It just happened the way most quiet erasures happen. My father found me near the punch bowl and introduced me to a county commissioner and a man who owned 4 car washes. This is our oldest, he said. She does something with filing at a courthouse. The commissioner nodded politely. I shook his hand and said it was nice to meet him. I let the story stand. I had been letting it stand for so long that it no longer felt like a decision. Being invisible was the one thing this family had ever allowed me to be good at. I had gotten very good at it. By 11, the party had thinned to the people who never left early. My sister Colleen was still going strong the way she had been since she was 16. She had a face that always knew where the camera was, even when there wasn't one. She had been drinking since late afternoon, not a lot by her standards, which is its own kind of sentence. Someone remembered the yard signs were still in the storage barn past the tree line. My mother said it could wait until morning. Colleen said it absolutely could not. A volunteer was coming at 7. It would look disorganized. I said good night and went upstairs to the guest room. The second door on the left, the one with my old twin bed and a closet full of my mother's winter coats. I heard the front hall from up there. You always could. I heard the keys shift in the wooden bowl, that flat little rattle, and then the storm door. I thought about nothing at all. I read for a while. Around 5 minutes to midnight I heard the garage door go up and come back down, then 2 low voices in the kitchen. It didn't sound like an argument. It sounded like arranging. I fell asleep. When I came down for water sometime after 1, the bowl in the front hall was empty. Not one set of keys in a house with 4 cars in the driveway. I noticed it the way you notice a picture hanging crooked. Then I went back upstairs and didn't think about it again for 2 more days. I should have. The local news came on at 7 while I was making coffee. A man had been struck on Route 9 near the co-op just before midnight and left there. He was 61. Critical condition at Mercy Regional. Witnesses had seen a dark SUV heading east and part of a plate. The anchor moved on to a high school football score. I stood there with the coffee pot in my hand and felt the temperature of the house change around me. My father had been in his study with the door shut since 6. Something that never happened on a Saturday. I could hear him on the phone using the voice he saved for people who owed him something. Colleen didn't come down. My mother said she had a migraine. I went out to the driveway for my bag and found my mother already there in a cardigan over her nightgown, wiping the inside edge of the garage door frame with a dish towel at 7:15 in the morning. She smiled at me. The pollen this year is unbelievable. My SUV was parked at the end of the row. It was not where I had left it. I had backed in the way I always did. Now it was nose in. I walked around to the front. The right headlight housing had a crack running through it like a dropped windshield. There was a scrape of something pale along the bumper. The whole panel was clean, not car clean. Rag clean. I stood there with my hand on the hood. My mother came up the driveway behind me. She didn't ask what I was looking at. Come inside, Elena, family meeting. Dale Whitfield was already at the kitchen island. He had been my father's lawyer since before I could drive. He taught me to cast a line off the dock at Kettle Lake when I was 9. He had a legal pad in front of him and a cup of my mother's coffee, and he had been there long enough to finish it. That was the first thing that told me what kind of morning this was. They didn't call a lawyer after they talked to me. They called a lawyer instead of talking to me. My father came in and sat down. He did not say good morning. They started talking the way they always talked when something had to be managed. Nobody said, "Is he going to live?" Nobody said the man's name. They said exposure. They said the next 72 hours. They said, if this gets a narrative before we give it one. Dale used the phrase manageable outcome twice. My mother poured more coffee. Underneath all of it in pieces, the actual facts assembled themselves in front of me. Colleen had taken keys out of the bowl at 11:30. Colleen had taken my SUV because it was the last one in and nothing was blocking it. Colleen had been drinking since 4 in the afternoon. Colleen had come back at 5 minutes to midnight with a cracked headlight and had not called anyone. My mother had made her a cup of tea. Nobody had called 911. Nobody had driven back out to Route 9. A man had lain in a ditch beside his bicycle for 19 minutes before a truck driver found him. Then Dale slid a sheet of paper across the granite, turned so it faced me. Already typed. Already dated. It was a confession. Mine. I read it twice. It said I had borrowed the vehicle, that I had been unfamiliar with the road, that I had panicked. Somebody had put the word panicked in my mouth at 6 in the morning. My mother came around the island and took hold of both my shoulders. She looked at me with more warmth than she had shown me in 3 years. Just say you were driving. I asked her if she understood what she was asking. She said she understood exactly, and that was why it had to be me. No husband, no children, no campaign. A job nobody could name. My father didn't get up. He looked at me across the counter with his reading glasses pushed up and laid it out the way he would lay out a budget line. She has a campaign, he said. You have nothing to lose. There it was, the whole family ledger in one sentence, said out loud in front of a lawyer. Not one person at that island flinched. Colleen came in then, sweatshirt, hair up, no makeup. She poured herself orange juice while I told them no. I said it once evenly. Then I said it again because the first one didn't seem to register. Dale said we should all take a breath. My father said we didn't have time to take a breath. My sister leaned back against the counter with the glass in her hand and looked at me the way you look at a dog doing a trick badly. She wasn't even angry, which was worse. Believe you anyway. I picked up my coat off the back of the chair. I got as far as the doorway, then my father said one more thing. Colleen already gave her statement this morning at 7. Your name is in it. I turned around. Dale wouldn't look at me. That was how I knew it was true and how I knew he had helped write it. She had told an investigator that her sister was visiting from out of state. That her sister had asked about the highway on-ramp. That her sister had gone out around 11:30. Not an accusation, better than an accusation. A helpful detail from a cooperative family. I stood in that doorway and did the arithmetic they were certain I couldn't do. The vehicle was registered to me. Witnesses had seen a dark SUV and half a plate. I had been asleep alone in a guest room with no one to say otherwise. The first person to hand police a story owns the shape of the story. Everyone who comes after is just disagreeing with it. My father was watching me work it out. He thought what he saw on my face was fear. It wasn't, it was recognition. I had spent 8 years as a public defender standing next to people who got convicted of things they didn't do. Almost none of them lost because of the evidence. They lost because somebody got there first. I put my coat back on the chair, not because they had won, but because leaving Harlow County that morning would have been the single most useful thing I could have done for them. The out-of-state sister who came for one night and fled, they knew a version of me that was 14 years out of date. They had never once bothered to check whether it had been revised. That was their first mistake. It was not going to be the expensive one. I should tell you what happened when I was 25 because it is the foundation of the whole house. I failed the bar exam the first time I took it. 40% of my class failed that year. It is a footnote in most lives. It happened in July. My father was 6 weeks out from a re-election. A man running for county commissioner needs a story that makes him human. So at a fundraiser at the Elks Lodge in front of 200 people who buy gravel and sell insurance, he told them his oldest had gone off to law school and washed out. He shrugged and said, "You can't win them all." The room laughed. He got the warmth he needed. My mother was standing next to him. Afterward, in the parking lot, I asked her how she could let him say that. She fixed my collar. She was gentle about it. That is what I remember most. "We don't have truths in this family, sweetheart," she said. "We have versions. I passed the bar in February. I never told them. I left Harlow County and took a public defender job 400 miles away. In my first year I learned something I mistook for wisdom for the next 14 years. If you don't tell people anything, they can't take anything, so I stopped telling them things. I stopped correcting the filing clerk joke. I stopped sending news. When I was sworn in years later, I stood in a robbing room and buttoned the collar myself, alone, because I hadn't invited a single person who shared my last name. I told myself the silence was dignity. It took a man bleeding in a ditch on Route 9 to show me what it actually was. By Sunday afternoon, the state police had taken the case over from the county, because Walter Boone had gone from critical to still critical, and the charge was going to be a felony either way. A detective named Dana Pewitt called the house and said she would be scheduling interviews with everyone who had been at the residence Friday night. My father took that call in the hallway with his hand over the receiver. Dale came back at 4 with a cleaner draft of my statement. The word panicked was gone, replaced with became disoriented. He set it on the coffee table and said there was no rush. Then he said the county attorney's office would want something by a week from Thursday. That is how it works. Somebody tells you there is no pressure and then hands you a deadline in the same breath, and you are supposed to hear the first part. I went out to the porch and called a woman named Renee Okaffer. I had sat across from her in a courtroom 9 years earlier and never forgotten her. I told her everything in about 4 minutes. She asked 2 questions. Had I said anything to any investigator? I hadn't. Had I touched my vehicle? Only the hood. Good, she said. Don't touch it again. Don't be alone with any of them. I'll be there Tuesday. I sat on that porch after we hung up and looked at my SUV at the end of the driveway with the cracked headlight. There was one thing in that car none of them knew existed. It had been recording since the moment somebody turned the key. People think a modern car is just a car. It is. It is a witness that never blinks and doesn't care who pays for it. Mine was a 2023. It did 3 things nobody thinks about when they buy one. It keyed the driver profile to the fob, so the seat and mirrors moved to whoever was holding it. It paired to a phone automatically and wrote that down. And it had an event data recorder that woke up when the airbag sensors felt a hard enough impact and saved the 5 seconds on either side of it. Speed, brake, throttle, steering angle. I sat in the passenger seat Monday morning with the door open and 1 foot on the driveway. I turned the screen on and did not touch anything else. The driver profile was set to guest. The seat was 4 inches forward of where I keep it. Under the phone menu in the list of paired devices there was one that hadn't been there Friday morning. Colleen, iPhone. Connected at 11:31 p.m. disconnected at 11:57. I looked at that for a long moment. Then I turned the screen off, got out, closed the door and did not take one single thing out of that vehicle. I want to be clear about why, because it is the most important decision in this entire story. I am a federal judge. I have thrown out evidence for less. If I pulled that data myself out of my own car as the person they were about to accuse, every hour of it becomes a question about me. At breakfast Dale mentioned that the family would take care of getting the headlight fixed. There was a body shop in Delort that could take it Wednesday. I said that was thoughtful of him. Then I went upstairs and called my insurance company. I told them in the flattest customer service voice I own that my vehicle may have been involved in an incident while in the possession of another driver, that liability was unclear, and that I wanted a claim opened and the vehicle preserved in its current condition pending investigation. It took 11 minutes. The adjuster put a hold on the vehicle before lunch. No shop in 3 counties will touch a car with an open claim and a preservation hold on it. They don't get paid and they do get sued. Nobody had to be told no. From Monday afternoon onward there was simply no way to fix that headlight, no way to vacuum that interior, and no way to make that seat go back 4 inches. It was the most boring thing I did all month. My father found out Tuesday because the body shop called Dale to cancel. He didn't say anything about it at dinner. He passed me the green beans and asked about the drive up. He looked at me for about a second and a half longer than a person looks at their daughter. I have spent my whole career watching people recalculate at council table. You can see it happen. Something they had filed under settled quietly moves into the open column. He was starting to wonder whether the daughter he had written off in a parking lot 14 years ago was actually the person standing in his kitchen. He didn't ask. Asking would have required believing there was something worth knowing. My mother refilled his water and said the beans were from the farmer's market. Everybody agreed they were good. On Wednesday I drove to Mercy Regional and sat in the surgical ICU waiting room for 2 hours in the corner. I did not tell anyone who I was, because I wasn't anyone there and had no business being anything else. Walter Boone's wife was in the chairs by the window. Her name is Sharon. She had a canvas bag with a crossword book in it that she never opened. A nurse came to update her. Sharon did what everyone does with medical people. She tried to make him a person instead of a hip. She said he had worked the line at the Blue Star Diner for 30 years. He could plate 40 covers an hour and never once got an order wrong. She said the truck needed a transmission, $1,800, and Walter had decided in August that he would ride the bike until Christmas and put the difference away, because that is what he does. He decides things and then he just does them. She said he had a helmet. He wore the helmet. She said that twice to the nurse, like the helmet was an argument she needed to keep winning. On the corkboard by the coffee machine, between a flu clinic notice and a church bulletin, somebody had pinned up one of my sister's campaign cards. Her face, that smile. The blue. Underneath, in white capital letters, the slogan her consultant had focus grouped in June. Accountability for Harlow County. I looked at it for a while. Then I got up, put $4 in the vending machine, bought Sharon Boone a coffee she didn't ask for, set it down next to her, and left before she could ask me what my name was. Thursday morning I went to see Dale Whitfield alone at his office above the pharmacy on Main. There was still a version of the world in my head, where a decent man had gotten swept into something, and needed one honest conversation to find his footing. He has a photograph on his wall of himself and my father, and 2 other men holding up a stringer of walleye at Kettle Lake in 1998. I am in the corner of that photograph, 11 years old, holding the net. He poured me coffee in a mug that said World's OKAYSD Golfer. I told him the whole thing, not as a suspect, not as a lawyer. I told him about the bowl and the keys and the seat position and the timeline. He listened the way he used to listen when I was a kid, explaining a knot, nodding along, letting me get to the end. When I got to the end, he set his coffee down. Sign the statement, kiddo. He said it kindly. He said the county attorney was prepared to be reasonable. With no priors, it would be a deferred sentence. In 18 months, it would be nothing but paperwork. He said it was the version that saved everybody. The man who taught me to cast off a dock was quietly explaining to me why I should take a felony for my sister. And he thought he was being generous. On the desk between us was a yellow legal pad. Clipped to the top of it was a memo slip with letterhead I recognized, because it had been on 100 filings I had read in my first year of practice. The office of the Harlow County Attorney, Rex Calder, my father's first campaign volunteer, class of 1994. Renee Okafor had come up that Tuesday and taken a room at the inn out by the highway. The afternoon I got back from Dale's office, she made me say all of it out loud again, while she took notes in a hand I couldn't read upside down. I suspect that is on purpose. Then she told me where I actually was, and it was worse than I had let myself put into words. 1. The moment I pull anything out of that vehicle myself, I am the accused party handling my own evidence, and any competent attorney turns the rest of the hearing into a conversation about my hands. 2. The ordinary door for all of this, the county attorney's office, is a man who has been at my father's elbow since before I could vote. A file can sit in an office like that for a very long time without anyone technically doing anything wrong. 3. And she was careful with this one, I hold a federal judicial commission, which means I don't get to be clever. Not one phone call to anyone I know. Nothing said to any reporter ever. Nothing that could ever be described as a judge leaning on a case. Every ordinary advantage a person in trouble has I had to hand back at the door, I said, so I have the truth and no way to move it. She kept her pen. Data gets challenged all day long, chain of custody, tampering, spoliation. I've done it myself and won. Then she said the thing I have thought about every week since. A witness under oath is a different animal, Elena. Sooner or later this case is going to need your face. Face. The one thing I had spent 14 years keeping out of every frame in that house. We did it on a Friday afternoon in the parking lot of a strip mall in Delort, because Renee wanted concrete and cameras, and a business address in the record. She hired a forensic technician named Priya Ravel out of the capital. Priya brought her own equipment and her own paperwork, and a phone on a tripod that ran the entire time. Renee narrated it for the recording like a woman reading a grocery list. Date, time, location, participants, vehicle identification number, odometer. Priya photographed the headlight, the bumper, the seat rails, the odometer, the paired device list, all of it before she touched anything. Then she pulled the module and the storage card. When she was done, she held them out to me on a flat palm. I stood in that parking lot and held the whole night of October 11th in my hand for about 10 seconds. It is smaller than a key. It weighs nothing. Priya asked if I wanted to review the contents before she sealed it. I said no. Renee's eyebrows went up a 1/4 inch, which for her is a shout. I said, if I watch it first, then every answer I give from here on out is an answer I've had time to shape. One day somebody is going to ask me under oath whether I saw it before I told my story, and I'm going to want to say no. Priya put it in a paper evidence bag, sealed the flap with red tape, signed across the seal and dated it. Renee signed under her. It went into a locked case in the trunk of a rental car. I didn't know what was on it, I only knew what my car had been awake for. And Route 9 wasn't the only thing it remembered that night. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't really about a car. It's about who your family has decided you are, and what happens the first time you refuse to agree with them. Sunday there was a dinner, not a family meeting. A dinner with the good plates and pot roast with the little onions, which I have loved since I was 6 and had not been served in this house in over a decade. My mother had gotten out the album, the fat green one. It sat at the end of the table like a third course. Emma was there and was allowed to stay up. My father asked me about the district I lived in and listened to the whole answer. Colleen passed me the rolls and said she liked my haircut. It was the warmest room I had been in with these people since I was in my 20s, and every single degree of it was on purpose. Knowing that did almost nothing to protect me. After Emma went up, my mother put her hand flat on the table and made the offer. Dale had spoken to Rex. A plea to a reduced count. No jail, community service. A deferred judgment that seals in 18 months, then she said the part she had been saving. She said it softly, looking right at me. And you'd be part of this family again, Elena, really part of it. Sunday dinners, Emma's birthdays, all of it. 14 years I had been standing outside that window and my mother finally opened the door. The price on the door was a felony and a man in a wheelchair. The terrifying thing wasn't the offer. I have been offered things by better manipulators in worse rooms. The terrifying thing was sitting at that table with the pot roast and the onions, feeling how much of me still wanted it, and understanding for the first time that they had always known exactly how much. Walter Boone woke up on the 18th. I heard it from a nurse's aide who recognized me from the waiting room and assumed I was a cousin. He had come out of the second surgery. They had gotten the rod in the tibia. On the 22nd, they got him vertical for the first time. I was down the hall when they did it. 2 physical therapists, a walker and a 61-year-old man with a hip full of hardware trying to move 8 feet across a room. It took him 4 minutes. When he got to the chair, he made a joke I couldn't hear. Both therapists laughed. Sharon stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. My father had told me I had nothing to lose. I sat in that hallway and counted what Walter Boone had already lost. 30 years of standing on a line for 8 hours, gone. The doctors were saying he would walk with a cane and he would never do a full shift again. $1,800 for a transmission he was saving toward while riding a bicycle at night in October. 19 minutes in a ditch. And in the waiting room on my way out, the television bolted up in the corner was showing my sister at a podium in front of the county building in the navy blazer, saying that her family was cooperating fully with the investigation and that her heart was with the Boone family at this difficult time. She had found exactly the right catch in her voice. I have watched a lot of people testify. I could not have told you it was fake. The press conference wasn't a defense, it was a frame. 2 days later, the Harlow Register ran a piece about the investigation. Buried in the 11th paragraph was a sentence attributed to a source close to the family. The source said the vehicle belonged to a sister who was estranged from the family, who lived out of state, and who had been having a hard time. That's all. 3 facts, all technically true, arranged into a person, estranged, out of state, having a hard time. I read it in a motel parking lot and felt something I hadn't felt since I was 25, the particular vertigo of watching a version of yourself get built by people who share your last name, and knowing that the version will always travel faster than you will. That evening Emma texted me for the first time in a month. She's 13, Aunt Elena, did you really do it? Nobody will tell me anything. I sat on the end of a motel bed and typed and deleted about 6 answers. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to tell her that her mother had been drinking since 4 in the afternoon and had left a man in a ditch and let her aunt's name go into a police statement. Every word of that would have been true, and I would have been doing to her exactly what her grandfather did to me at a fundraiser in 1998, so I wrote, I did not. I promise you I'll tell you the whole thing when it's over, and I put the phone face down because when I told that kid the truth I wanted it to be provable, and those are 2 different things. I drove the 6 hours home on a Wednesday for 1 day. It was the loneliest 24 hours of the whole thing. I went to see the circuit's ethics counsel, a small, precise man named Howard Lynn who has an office with no windows. I self-reported before anyone could discover anything, which is the only move that has ever worked in the history of this kind of trouble. I told him a member of my immediate family had implicated me in a state criminal matter, that I was likely to be a witness, and that I intended to cooperate fully. He wrote it all down. Then he gave me the rules I already knew and had been hoping he would soften. I do not identify myself by office in connection with any of it. I do not contact anyone at the county attorney's office or the state police or any court in any capacity other than as a private citizen represented by counsel. I make no public statement of any kind. If a reporter calls, I say nothing. He said, "You understand that in practice this means you will have fewer options than an ordinary person, not more." I said I did. Before I left the courthouse I stopped in my chambers, which were dark, and stood there for a minute. The robe was on the back of the door where it always is. I have worn it for 2 years, and it has never once made me feel like the person my family thinks I am. It has only ever felt like a thing I borrowed from a serious institution and had better take care of. I locked the door and drove back to Harlow County with one suitcase and no title at all. Whatever came next, I would be facing it as nobody in particular, which, lucky for me, was the role this family had been training me for my entire life. Thursday came and I didn't sign. There was no scene. I sat in my mother's living room and said I would not be signing anything. My father folded the newspaper and said, "All right." That was the whole conversation. Then the house started to close one room at a time in the polite way. Friday my mother mentioned that her sister was coming through and would need the guest room. So I moved to the Harlow Inn out by the highway, 40 rooms, a waffle machine, and a view of a grain elevator. Monday a letter came from Dale Whitfield's office on his letterhead, addressed to Renee. It said his firm represented the Voss family. It said that any suggestion Colleen Voss operated the vehicle was contradicted by the family's recollection. And it said, in a sentence that took me 3 readings to fully appreciate, that the family would, if necessary, describe how the vehicle had been made available to another driver that evening by its owner with knowledge of the circumstances. There it is. If I wouldn't be the driver, they would make me the person who handed the keys to a drunk. Same felony neighborhood, softer paperwork. My name in it either way. That afternoon Detective Pewitt called my cell and asked whether I could come in Wednesday morning to the state police post in Brannagan. Then she said, in the flat way that people say things they've decided to say a certain way, "And please bring your counsel." I hung up and sat on the end of that motel bed and understood that I had been formally moved into a category. The state police post in Brannagan is a brick building with a flag and a vending machine that only takes exact change. Renee met me in the lot. Dana Pewitt is about 45 and has the specific patience of somebody who has been lied to professionally for 20 years and stopped taking it personally around year 6. She started by telling us 2 things I did not expect, and which changed the shape of the month. The first was that 11 days earlier the state police had gone to the manufacturer directly with a warrant for the telematics on my vehicle, its own copy of the paired device log, and the crash record from the company's servers. Nothing to do with me or my hands or my sealed bag. The world had a second door, and it had been opening the whole time without asking my permission. The second was that Colleen's statement had a hole in it. She had told them the household was quiet after 11:15, but a neighbor's doorbell camera across the county road had caught headlights coming down the Voss driveway at 11:29 and coming back at 11:56. My sister had put herself upstairs for all 27 of those minutes, then Pewitt asked me to walk through my night. I did: the bowl, the stairs, the book, the garage door at 5 to 12, the voices, the water, the empty bowl, no adjectives, no conclusions. When you've listened to 10,000 witnesses, you learn that the honest ones are boring and the liars are vivid. At the end she flipped back a page, stopped and read something twice. Then she looked up at me. "One more question," she said. "Occupation." I hadn't planned it. There was no moment where I decided. She asked a routine question off an intake sheet, and I answered it because you answer questions from investigators truthfully or you don't answer them at all, and there is nothing in between that ends well. I said, "United States District Judge." The room went quiet. Renee looked at the table. Pewitt did not say anything for about 4 seconds, which is a long time in a small room. Then she wrote it down. Then she asked which district. I told her. She wrote that down too. She had one follow-up and it was a good one. She asked why it wasn't in the file. I said, because nobody had asked. She closed the folder, stood and walked us out through the front. At the door she put out her hand and said, "Thank you for coming in, Your Honor." My mother was in the lobby. She had driven over on her own without telling anyone to sit in a plastic chair by the vending machine and be helpful and available and find out what was being said about her family. She was 6 feet away. She heard all of it. I watched my mother's face do something I have seen 1,000 times from the bench and never once from her. It wasn't pride. Pride looks different. It was recalculation, the exact expression of a person moving an item out of the liabilities column and trying to work out quickly what it might be worth. She said my name once. I kept walking. In the parking lot, Renee asked if I was all right. I stood there with my keys in my hand and said, "Who'd believe you anyway?" "Well, we're about to find out." Got back to the house inside an hour. My father called me that evening and asked me to come by. I said we could talk on the porch. We did, with the door shut behind us and the yard light on. I had spent the drive over bracing for the wrong thing. I thought he would be angry about the concealment, or humiliated, or that somewhere in there would be one sentence about how he wished he'd known. My father was delighted. He sat down in the wicker chair and said it was remarkable, twice, and then he started working. Did I understand what this changed? A federal judge. His hands were moving now. A federal judge who takes responsibility for a tragic accident, who steps forward, who doesn't hide behind her position. He said it could be reframed inside a week. He said Rex could be brought along. He said the story stops being a family covering for a candidate and becomes a family of public servants. And Colleen's numbers go up, not down, because voters forgive a family that owns its mistakes. He had found a way to spend my commission, 14 years of not knowing what I did, and inside of 1 hour he had run the appraisal. The answer was that I was worth more as a confession with a title attached than I had ever been worth as a daughter. I sat on the porch rail and let him finish. That was the moment I stopped hopping. Not the kitchen, not the letter, not the leak. It turns out hope is the last thing they take, and they don't even take it on purpose. They just say what they actually think out loud and then it's gone. 2 things happened that week. On Tuesday, Rex Calder gave a statement to the Register saying his office had reviewed the matter, that the evidence to date did not establish who was operating the vehicle, and that he would not be charging anyone at this time. He said the word tragedy and the phrase grieving community. Walter Boone was not dead, and nobody at that paper asked him about it. On Thursday, Dale filed his supplemental letter. 4 members of the Voss family were prepared to state that I had made my vehicle available to my sister that evening with knowledge that she had been drinking. 4, my father, my mother, my sister, and because they needed a 4th and she was there, my Aunt Charlene, who had gone to bed at 9. Renee laid it out for me at a booth at the diner by the inn. The state police had a good file, but a state case gets prosecuted by the county attorney, and the county attorney had just publicly announced he wasn't prosecuting. The only thing that overrides a man like Rex Calder is a record so clean and so public that not charging becomes more expensive than charging. Sworn testimony on the record from the one person in that house whose account contradicted the other 4, and who had nothing to gain by giving it. She said, it has to be you, and it has to be in the open or it doesn't happen at all. Which is when I finally understood the shape of the last 5 weeks. There was one door left in this entire thing, and it only opened from the inside. Let me stop here for a second, because I want you to sit with the question I had to sit with that night. If telling the truth cost you your entire family, not an argument, not a bad Christmas, all of it permanently, would you still tell it? Don't answer too fast. She came to the inn on a Sunday night alone in an old sweatshirt with the hood down. She had driven her own car and parked it around the side by the ice machine, no phone in her hand. I have never in my adult life seen my sister with nothing in her hand. I let her in. She sat on the edge of the desk chair. For about 10 minutes she was a person I had never met. She talked about being 16. About the summer her friends went to a lake house and she went to a media training in the capital because Dad had gotten her a slot through a friend. About how she learned to hold a smile for a photographer's 3rd try. She said that when she was in 9th grade she got a C in chemistry and our father didn't speak to her for 4 days. She said it the way you mention weather. Then she looked up and said, "Do you know what it's like to be this family's only investment?" And I did know actually from the other side of it. She didn't apologize. That's the part I need you to hear. In that whole conversation she never once said Walter Boone's name, never asked how he was, never said she was sorry for anything except her own position. What she had come to do was trade. Take the plea, she said. You're strong enough to survive being the failure. You've been doing it for years. Not. For about a minute I could see the sister I might have had if this family had been in any other business. Then she stood up to leave, and on her way past the window she checked her reflection and touched her hair, and the campaign came back into her face like a light switching on. They set the meeting for Wednesday at 11 in the conference room above the pharmacy. Everybody came. My father in a jacket, my mother with her handbag in her lap, Colleen in the navy blazer, straight from a radio interview. Aunt Charlene, Dale at the head of the table with a folder, inside the folder the 3rd version of my confession. And beside it, set out square on the wood, a black fountain pen with the cap already off. I have thought a lot about that pen. He had uncapped it before I walked in. That's a man who has never once been told no in this room. Renee sat down and opened her briefcase. I picked the pen up. I did. I want to be honest about it. I held it. And then I set it down on the table and pushed it a few inches away. I said no in a voice I didn't have to raise. Then Renee started reading. At 8:40 that morning we had filed with the Office of the Attorney General a sworn affidavit from me describing everything I have told you. The bowl, the keys, the seat, the paired device, the garage door at 5 to midnight, the meeting at the kitchen island, the typed statement. Attached to it, a formal request for appointment of a special prosecutor on the grounds that the county attorney has a documented 32-year political relationship with a person of interest. Attached to that, a chain of custody affidavit from Priya Raval and a transfer receipt for one sealed evidence bag delivered that morning to the state police post at Brannagan. My father said my name. My mother said it 3 times in 3 different registers, all the way to the door, the sharp one, then the soft one, then the one from when I was small. I didn't turn around. 14 years I had been the quiet daughter of the Voss family. She died in that doorway on a Wednesday morning, and I left her sitting at the table with the pen. That night something slid under the door of room 14, an envelope, no stamp, my mother's handwriting. There was no letter in it. There was a photograph, me at 7 years old on the front steps in a red coat, holding a cat we had for 2 years. On the back in ballpoint it said, "Kitchen tomorrow 9. Come alone, please." She had underlined please, so I sat at that kitchen island for the second time in the same seat with the same coffee. And my mother told me what she had never told anyone. On the night of October 11th she did not go to bed. She stayed up because there were still 4 people in her yard and a caterer's van in the drive. She was in the front room at 5 to midnight when the garage door went up. She met Colleen in the kitchen. My sister's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get the tea out of the box. My mother went out through the mudroom and stood in the garage and looked at the right front of my vehicle, at the crack and the pale scrape. Then she came back in and took every set of keys out of the wooden bowl in the front hall and put them in her cardigan pocket. Not so no one could drive. So that at 7 the next morning, when the news came on, nobody would be able to say what had been where. She had known since 11:58 that night. She had known when she wiped the door frame. She had known when she poured Dale his coffee. She had known when she came around that island and put both hands on my shoulders and looked in my face and told me to say I was driving. I asked her why she was telling me now. She reached across and took my hand. She was crying and she was completely composed. I realized she hadn't come to confess. Confession requires regret. She had come to negotiate. The hearing was the next morning at 9:30. She had 18 hours and she used every one of them well because my mother is the best strategist in that family and always has been. The proof is that nobody outside it has ever heard her name. She didn't threaten me. She didn't mention the 4 affidavits or the letter or the register. She held my hand on the granite and she made me an offer. It was the only offer in 14 years that ever had a chance of working. "Come home," she said. "Not for a dinner, come home, be our daughter again. Christmases, Emma's graduation, your father will put your picture back up. I'll do it myself. Everything you've wanted since you were 25 and you know it and I know it." Then, softly, almost tenderly, "All you have to do is not remember quite so clearly tomorrow." She wasn't asking me to lie, she was too smart for that. Lying under oath is a thing you can be prosecuted for. She was asking me to be uncertain. To say I couldn't be sure about the time, that I'd been asleep. That it had been a long day. Nobody would ever be able to touch me for it. Walter Boone would go home with a cane and a settlement from an insurance company. My sister would be in the state Senate by spring, and I would get my family back. She finished it the way she finishes everything, with the sentence she taught me in a parking lot when I was 25, only turned around into a gift. "Pick the version where you still have a family, sweetheart." I looked at the wall past her shoulder, at the photographs that stop in the year I turned 25, and I gave her my answer in one sentence. Then I drove back to the inn and slept for 6 hours, which surprised me. What I said to my mother in that kitchen was this: "Mom, I've spent 14 years being the version that was convenient. Tomorrow I'm going to be accurate." Then I said I loved her because it was true, and because I wanted it on the record between us. And then I left. The Harlow County Courthouse is a limestone building from 1911 with 9 steps and a bad handrail. At 20 to 9 the next morning there were 2 television cameras from the Capitol and 3 reporters at the bottom of them. They knew by then. Somebody at the register had run the appointment down. The headline that morning had the word "Judge" in capital letters next to my last name. Forever. A woman put a microphone near my face and asked me if I had any comment on my sister. I said no comment. She asked if I was here in my official capacity. I said I was here as a witness. She asked one more something about the family. I said no comment. I went up the 9 steps and through the doors and I did not stop. There is no clip of me anywhere saying anything about any of it. That was the entire strategy, and it cost me more than anything else in this story. My father had told me I had nothing to lose. He was right in a way he had never bothered to look at closely. I had nothing they had ever counted: my name, my oath, and my spine, and I was about to spend all 3 of them in one morning. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old radiators. In the first row on the aisle in a wheelchair with a cane across his lap and his wife beside him was Walter Boone. The special prosecutor was a man named Grant Ellery, appointed 8 days earlier out of the Attorney General's office. He had the gift of asking short questions. I was sworn at 10:15. I sat in a wooden chair in a room with a ceiling fan that clicked once every rotation, and I told it in order, the bowl in the front hall and what my mother started at 7. The keys going in at 4 in the afternoon, the wine at the party, the yard signs and the storage barn, the stairs, the second door on the left, the rattle of the bowl, the storm door, the garage at 11:56, the voices, the empty bowl at 1 a.m., the news at 7, the dish towel, the crack in the headlight housing. The seat 4 inches forward, the paired device that said 11:31 at night, the lawyer already sitting at the island, the typed statement with my name on it and the word panicked in it, which somebody later changed to became disoriented. I did not editorialize once. Priya Raval had testified before me and put the sealed bag in the record, red tape and signature and date, opened in front of the clerk, matched line for line against the manufacturer's own telematics that the state police had pulled independently weeks before I ever handed anything to anybody. Then Colleen's attorney stood up for cross. He was good. He went exactly where I would have gone. He asked how a family could possibly fail to know that their own daughter sat on a federal bench. He said it twice with the right amount of disbelief, and he turned toward the gallery when he said it because he wanted the room to hear how absurd it was. And he was right that it was absurd. I let the fan click twice. Then I said, because I helped them not know for 14 years, I made it easy, that's my share of this, counselor, and I finished paying it. Asked me to clarify. Behind him at the defense table my sister started talking to her lawyers. Here is a thing I have learned from 11 years around criminal courtrooms. People who are coached for cameras are the worst witnesses alive because a camera never interrupts you and a courtroom does nothing else. Her attorney told her to sit down. She didn't. She stood up at the defense table in the navy blazer with her hands out, palms up, the gesture she uses at the end of a stump speech, and she started to reframe. She said this had been turned into something it was. She said her sister had been out of the family for years and there was context the court wasn't hearing. She said the word narrative out loud in a courtroom, which is a thing you can only do if you have never in your life been in one. The judge told her twice that she would have her opportunity. On the third try she got to the end of the sentence she had been circling for 7 weeks, and it came out of her at full volume in a room with a court reporter in it. It was one mistake. 1. People like her get to fail their entire lives and it costs them nothing. I don't get even one. Nobody moved. Walter Boone looked at the floor. In the third row my mother put her hand over her mouth. I don't know to this day whether it was for her daughter at the table or her daughter in the chair. Then the judge gave it and it was over in the flat administrative way these things are actually over. Probable cause found, bound over for trial. Conditions of release modified. Surrender of passport. A subpoena issued that afternoon to Elena Voss regarding the location and handling of a set of vehicle keys on the night of October 11th. I sat in that wooden chair while the room emptied and thought about my sister asking me who'd believe me anyway. Under oath, with the truth and a technician's signature across a seal. Everyone, Colleen. That's the entire point of the building. She took a plea in February to felony leaving the scene of an accident involving serious injury. 60 days in the county jail, 3 years of probation, restitution, license suspended for a year. She withdrew from the race in a statement that ran 90 seconds and thanked her supporters. Dale Whitfield is under investigation by the state bar for his conduct in the preparation of a statement for an unrepresented party. He has not written to me, and I don't expect him to. Rex Calder announced in April that he would not seek another term and joined a firm in the capital that does municipal bond work. My parents were not charged. Ellery looked at it hard and told Renee the truth, proving what my mother did with a set of keys in her own house passed. A jury was not a case he could win. I want to be honest about how that sat. It sat badly for about a month, then it stopped. A courtroom is a narrow instrument, and it was never going to give me what I actually needed. By spring I understood that what I actually needed had already happened in a doorway above a pharmacy. The party organization slotted a county supervisor into my sister's spot by March, and he is pulling fine. My father still has his table at the Legion breakfast. Nothing was cleansed. That's not what happens. Walter Boone went back to the Blue Star in December, 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, on a stool they bolted down for him next to the flat top. The civil side settled with the insurer in the spring. It isn't enough and it's more than he'd have gotten. He bought the transmission. Then he bought Sharon a greenhouse. I stop in whenever I'm in the county on paperwork, which I still am. He lets me buy a coffee and then he charges me for the pie. Howard Lynn closed my ethics file in March with a 2-line memo. Judge was a fact witness in a family matter. No use of office. No violation. On the shelf in my chambers behind the desk where most judges put a photograph of their family, there is now a picture of an old man in an apron standing outside a diner with one hand on a cane and the other on my shoulder. In May, Emma texted me. Mom says I'm not supposed to text you, but nobody will tell me what actually happened. I typed for a long time. Then I told her the truth, all of it in the plainest language a 13-year-old could carry. I did not make either of her parents a monster and I did not make them innocent. She wrote back, thank you for saying it straight. Nobody ever says it straight. There's one more thing and it's small and it's the reason I'm telling you any of this. In June, a new clerk started in my chambers, 24 years old, nervous, very serious about the coffee. On her second week in the middle of nothing, she asked me whether I had family nearby. A year ago I would have said no and let it go by the way I let everything go by for 14 years, and she would have written me down as private and been right. Instead I heard myself say it out loud, the entire true sentence. My family's 6 hours away and we're not in contact. It's because my sister injured a man with my car and my parents asked me to take the charge and I testified. She didn't know where to put her face. I told her it was all right, people mostly don't know what to say and they don't have to. Then we went back to the motion calendar. My mother was right about one thing and I've decided to let her keep it. Families do run on stories, that part is true, but I'm done telling versions, if your family only loves the version of you that stays convenient that was never love. And the day you stop auditioning for it is the day the rest of your life is finally allowed to start. That's my story. One empty key bowl, one sealed evidence bag, and one signature I never gave. If there's someone in your life who has you filed away as the family failure, hear me. You do not owe anybody a smaller version of yourself, not at Thanksgiving, not ever.